The cold keeps secrets, but the dark gives them away. Here in Alaska, the snow covers tracks, the wind drowns screams, and no one comes when you call for help. This is Night Veins. True-style horror that feels too close, too possible. It began, like any other night, until the lights flickered, and I realized I wasn't the only one still awake. Don't face the night alone. Hit subscribe now and let the fear run through your veins. The first time I caught him staring, it was through the glass door of the gas station, his face half lit by the buzzing fluorescent lights, eyes locked on me as if he'd been waiting all night just to see me pull in. I froze with my hands still, gripping the steering wheel. It was past midnight, and the only light on the stretch of road came from the harsh glow above that tiny station. Everything else was buried in black Alaskan winter. The snow on the ground reflected the pale glare, making the station look like some floating island of sickly light in the middle of nowhere. My gas gauge had been hovering on empty for the past 30 miles, and this place was the only thing I'd passed in nearly an hour of driving through frozen wilderness. The sign read simply, "Fuel and Mart," in faded red letters. It looked old, like it hadn't been updated in decades. I should have been relieved to find it, but the way the attendant stood there, motionless, just watching me before I even stepped out of the car, set every nerve in my body on edge. When I finally opened the car door, the cold bit instantly into my face, sharp and merciless. My boots crunched into the snow-packed gravel as I walked toward the pumps. He didn't move. His eyes tracked me the entire way, and I tried not to meet them, pretending I didn't notice. The pump was old, one of those where you had to flip the lever and wait for the slow grind of numbers. I slid my card, but it spat it back with a beep, card reader error. Of course. My stomach sank. That meant I had to go inside. I turned toward the station. He was still staring. Same position, same blank expression. I swallowed hard, pulled my coat tighter, and pushed through the glass door. A little bell jingled above me, the sound shrill in the quiet. The place smelled faintly of burnt coffee and something metallic, like rust. Shelves were half-stocked with dusty cans of soup, random hardware supplies, and hunting gear. The heater hummed loudly, pushing out air that barely warmed the inside. He was behind the counter, standing perfectly straight. Up close, he looked older than I thought. Late 50s, maybe, his skin weathered from years of Alaskan cold. His name tag was scratched and bent, but I could make out the name. Don. Card didn't work outside, I said, forcing a casual tone. Can I prepay for gas? He didn't answer right away, just looked at me, his eyes unblinking, his lips pressed together in a thin line. Finally, he said in a flat voice, "Pump 3. I glanced back outside. I was the only car there. "Yeah, that's me," I said. His eyes didn't leave mine. Slowly, deliberately, he tapped a few keys on the register. "How much?" I hesitated. 40. He punched it in, then slid the receipt toward me without a word. His fingers were pale, nails cracked. They lingered on the counter for a second too long, as if waiting for me to notice them. "Thanks," I muttered, taking the slip and heading back out. As I filled the tank, I couldn't shake the feeling of his eyes still on me. When I glanced toward the window, I was right. He was standing there, staring through the glass again. Same stiff posture, same expression. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe he was just bored, or maybe that was just how small-town attendants were. Still, when the tank finally clicked full, I was more than ready to get back in the car and drive, until my eyelids gave out. But when I slid into the driver's seat and turned the key, nothing happened. The dashboard flickered, then died. I tried again, just a hollow clicking sound. My chest tightened. The car had been fine all the way from Anchorage. It couldn't just die now, not here. I sat there for a long second, gripping the steering wheel. Snowflakes drifted against the windshield, the world around me silent except for the faint hum of the station's lights. Then, movement. Through the corner of my eye, I saw the glass door swing open. Don stepped outside. He didn't put on a jacket, didn't even flinch at the cold. He just walked slowly toward me, his boots crunching in the snow. I rolled down my window an inch. "Car won't start," I said quickly, trying to sound casual again. He leaned down, his face too close to the crack in the window. His breath fogged the glass. "Battery," he said. His voice was deep, almost hoarse. "Cold kills them fast." "Yeah, maybe," I said. He didn't move, just kept staring, eyes scanning my face like he was memorizing it. Finally, he said, "Come inside. Phone's in the back." My stomach churned. Something in his tone wasn't an offer. It was more like an order. "I'll give it a minute," I said, forcing a small laugh. "Sometimes it just takes a few tries." He stood there another moment, his head tilted slightly before finally turning and walking back inside. I tried the ignition 3 more times. Nothing. The car was dead. The truth hit me hard. I was stranded. Middle of the night. Middle of nowhere. And the only person around was him. With no choice, I grabbed my phone. No service. Just the red, no signal icon mocking me in the corner. I swore under my breath and finally pushed the door open again. The cold was unbearable now, slicing into my lungs. I trudged back toward the station, my boots sinking into fresh snow. Inside, he was waiting. Same spot behind the counter, eyes fixed on the door like he knew I'd be back. "Phone?" I asked, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. He didn't speak. He just motioned toward a door behind the counter. A plain wooden door with a faded "Employees Only" sign taped crookedly to it. Something in me resisted. Every instinct screamed not to go back there. "Could you bring it out here?" I asked carefully. His expression didn't change. "Phones. In the back," he said again. I hesitated. Then, trying not to show fear, I nodded and stepped toward the counter. He didn't move aside. He just kept watching me as I reached for the door handle myself. The hallway behind it was narrow, dimly lit by a single buzzing bulb. The walls were lined with shelves stacked with boxes, old supplies, cleaning chemicals. At the very end sat a small desk with a rotary phone on it. I hurried down the hall and picked up the receiver. The line was dead. "No dial tone?" His voice came from behind me. I spun around. He was standing in the hallway now, blocking the exit, his tall frame. Casting a long shadow. "No," I said, my throat dry. "It's dead." He didn't answer, just watched me. Then slowly, he smiled. The kind of smile that didn't belong on someone's face in that moment. It was too wide, too deliberate. "Been dead for years," he said softly. My heart pounded. I stepped back, my shoulder bumping against the shelves. "You said there was a phone." He shrugged slightly, still smiling. "There is. Just doesn't work." I didn't know what to say. My breath came, quick and shallow, fogging the cold. Air that somehow seemed to seep even inside. "Car trouble," he said, his tone almost mocking now. "No phone, no signal. Rough night." I swallowed hard. "Do you have a jumper? For the battery?" He tilted his head, considering. "Maybe." His eyes never left mine. "But you'll owe me." Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. I forced a nod. "Fine. Whatever it takes." He stared another long moment, then finally stepped aside. "Wait here." I didn't move until he disappeared back into the store. Then I exhaled sharply, my legs trembling. I didn't wait like he told me. Instead, I slipped out of the hallway and back into the main store. He wasn't behind the counter anymore. I looked through the window. He was outside now, walking slowly, toward my car. My mind raced. I didn't trust him. Every instinct screamed that if I let him take control of the situation, I'd regret it, so I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed a snow shovel leaning near the door and stepped back. Outside, he was at my hood, pulling it open with steady movements. "Stay back," I said, my voice louder than I felt. He didn't even look up, just checking the battery. I said, "Stay back." Finally, he lifted his head. His eyes glinted under the fluorescent lights, and for the first time, there was no mask of politeness. Just something darker. He let the hood drop shut with a loud clang. The sound echoed through the empty night. "You're not from around here," he said slowly. "No," I admitted. My hands tightened on the shovel. His smile returned, colder than before. That's what I thought. For a long, tense moment, we just stood there. The snow fell silently around us, the air between us sharp as knives. Then, without another word, he turned and walked back toward the station. I didn't move until he disappeared inside. Then I dropped the shovel, rushed into my car, and tried. The ignition one more time. Desperation flooding every nerve. The engine roared to life. I didn't question it. I slammed the car into drive, spun onto the icy road, and didn't look back. But in the rearview mirror, just before the station disappeared, into the blackness, I saw him standing in the doorway again, watching, like he knew I'd be back someday. The first thing I noticed was the sound of my own engine, low and steady in the frozen air before I even saw the car. I stepped out of the dim motel hallway, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, and froze at the sight through the frosted window. There, parked directly outside room 6, the very room I had just checked into an hour earlier, was my car. The headlights glared through the snowflakes, exhaust curling into the night, but my keys were in my pocket. My pulse slammed in my ears. I fumbled into my coat, digging into the inner lining where I always kept them. My fingers wrapped around cold metal. Still there. I hadn't dropped them. I hadn't handed them off. They were right where I left them. So, how was my car running? I pressed my face closer to the glass. The car was unmistakable. Same dent in the front bumper from a moose encounter last winter. Same cracked taillight taped with red plastic. Same sticker on the back window from a gas station in Anchorage. It was mine, down to the detail. I whispered to myself, "That's impossible." The motel hallway around me was silent, the kind of silence only small Alaskan towns carried in the middle of the night. The only light came from the buzzing neon vacancy sign outside, bleeding a sickly red glow into the snow. I tried to steady my breathing. Maybe someone hot-wired it. Maybe I left it unlocked. But the reality pressed into my chest. My car wasn't even parked outside that room when I checked in. I had left it 2 spaces down. And yet, there it was. I slipped the keys out of my pocket, clutching them so hard they dug into my palm. I twisted the fob. The horn should have chirped. The lights should have blinked. Nothing. A shiver ran through me that had nothing to do with the cold. I knew I couldn't just stand there. I had to see for myself. The motel door creaked as I pushed it open, the icy wind rushing in to sting my face. My boots crunched on snow as I stepped onto the lot. The engine's low rumble grew louder, vibrating faintly under my feet. I circled the car slowly, my breath rising in white puffs. The windows were fogged from the heat inside. Through the windshield I saw the steering wheel, the dashboard glowing faintly. Empty. Nobody in the driver's seat. Nobody at all. My hand trembled as I reached for the door handle. The metal burned from the cold. I tugged once, twice. Locked. I pressed my face against the glass, cupping my hands to block the glare. My own backpack sat in the passenger seat, my jacket in the back, everything exactly where I'd left it. I staggered back, my boots sliding, slightly on the ice. My keys were in my hand. My car was in front of me, but it was running, alive, without me. That was when I heard it, the sound of another engine, not from outside. from behind me. I whipped around. At the far end of the lot, in the shadows, another car sat idling, identical to mine. Same dent, same cracked light, same sticker. Both engines purred in unison, the white plumes of exhaust twisting together in the frigid night. My knees almost buckled. I clutched the keys like they were the only thing anchoring me to reality. The motel office light flicked on suddenly, spilling a rectangle of yellow onto the snow. The clerk, an older man with thinning hair, shuffled out onto the porch in a heavy parka. He squinted toward me. "You all right out there?" he called, voice muffled by the scarf over his mouth. I opened my mouth to answer, but the words died. Because when I looked back, the second car was gone. Only mine sat there, humming steadily in the snow. The clerk frowned. "What's the problem?" Forced myself to speak. Someone's messing with my car." He pulled his scarf down a bit, revealing a confused look. "Ain't nobody here. You're the only guest tonight." I shook my head violently. "No, there was—" I stopped myself. I didn't even know how to explain. "Come inside," he said after a pause. "Too cold to stand out there arguing with shadows." I glanced at the car again. The headlights glared back, bright and unblinking. My reflection warped in the icy windshield. Reluctantly, I followed the clerk back into the office. The heater blasted, making the small space almost suffocating. He gestured for me to sit, but I couldn't. I paced instead, still gripping my keys. "Where'd you park?" he asked. "2 spaces down from my room," I said. He frowned. "You sure? Only car I seen pull up was right outside 6. "That's not possible," I said sharply. "I parked," but my voice faltered. Had I? I tried to replay the moment in my head, dragging my luggage across the lot, stamping snow off my boots. I was exhausted from the drive. Could I have misremembered? No. I remembered locking it. I remembered seeing the dent as I walked past. "I know what I did," I said finally, more to myself than to him. The clerk watched me for a long moment, then shrugged. "Strange things happen out here in the dark," he muttered. "Road plays tricks on the mind." I didn't answer. My head throbbed. My stomach churned. When I stepped back outside a few minutes later, the car was off. Headlights dark. Engine silent. I stood there in the cold, my own breath fogging the air, waiting for some explanation. Nothing came. I tried the key fob again. This time, the horn chirped. The lights blinked. Normal. Perfectly normal. But I didn't believe it. That night, I barely slept. Every creak in the walls, every groan of the wind, jolted me awake. At one point, around 3 a.m., I thought I heard the low rumble of an engine. Again. I crept to the window, heart hammering. The lot was empty. Snow drifted across it in soft waves. My car sat exactly where I'd left it, dark and still. I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Just exhaustion, isolation, the tricks of a long winter drive. But in the morning, when I finally went outside to leave, I found fresh tire tracks beside mine. 2 sets. Both identical, and for the first time in years, I hesitated before getting into my own car, because I wasn't entirely sure it was mine anymore. The first footprint was already melting when I saw it, a dark red blot spreading slowly across the frozen planks of my cabin floor. I froze in the doorway, snow still clinging to my boots, a bag of groceries cutting into my palm. The cabin was supposed to be locked. I had double-checked before driving into town that morning. Yet there, stamped clear as day across the frost, was the outline of a bare human foot, each toe sharp, the heel smudged with blood. My throat tightened. The cabin was dead silent, only the faint crackle of the wood stove embers from last night still lingering in the air. Outside, the wind whipped snow against the windows, but inside, stillness. I set the bag down carefully, every sound amplified in the quiet. Another footprint trailed away from the first, then another, leading deeper into the cabin, toward the narrow hallway that split off to the bedroom and storage room. The sight made my stomach clench. They weren't just random smears. They were deliberate, each step placed carefully, like someone had taken their time walking barefoot through my home. And they were fresh. Too fresh. My first instinct was to grab the rifle mounted above the fireplace. I eased it down, loaded from habit, and cradled it against my shoulder. My breath fogged in front of me, heart thudding in my ears. Step by step, I followed the bloody trail. The boards creaked beneath me. The prints turned sharper as I moved down the hall, pressed deeper into the frost, as if the person had been heavier with each step. I reached the bedroom door. It was half open, the kind of open I never left. A faint draft seeped out, colder than the rest of the cabin. I nudged the door wider with the barrel of the rifle. The room was empty. My cot against the far wall was untouched, the blankets still messy from the night before. The small dresser sat the same as always, my clothes folded inside. Nothing looked disturbed, except the floor. The prints circled the room, around the bed, around the dresser, before stopping at the window. The latch was undone. The glass frosted, a thin stream of wind whistling through. I leaned closer. More prints, faint, disappeared into the snow outside. Whoever had been here, they left through the window. But the blood. I crouched, inspecting one of the prints. The edges were thick and dark, congealed slightly against the cold. Whoever it was had been injured. Badly. I stood slowly, the rifle tight in my grip. My mind raced with possibilities. Some hunter, lost and wounded, stumbling through the snow? Someone from town playing some twisted prank? Or something worse? Something I didn't want to name? I checked the rest of the cabin, every corner, every shelf. Nothing else was out of place. But the unease only deepened. Whoever left those prints had been inside for a while. Long enough to circle my bedroom. Long enough to stand there and, what? Watch me sleep? That night, I barely closed my eyes. Every snap of the logs in the stove made me sit upright. Every whistle of the wind through the cabin boards made me grip the rifle tighter. By dawn, exhaustion set in, but the unease didn't fade. I decided to follow the tracks outside. Snow crunched under my boots as I circled to the side of the cabin. The trail was still there, faint but visible. Bare feet pressed into the snow, each one smeared with blood that had frozen into dark patches. The trail led away from the cabin, into the tree line. I followed, heart pounding. The forest was quiet, smothered under heavy snow. The tracks wove between spruces, shallow in some spots, deep in others, as though the person had stumbled. After 50 yards, the trail grew erratic, the prints doubling back, circling trees, then continuing. It wasn't just someone fleeing. It was someone wandering. Finally, after nearly a quarter mile, the trail ended. No body, no sign of collapse, just stopped. The last print was pressed deep, blood pooled around it, but after that, nothing. The snow stretched pristine and untouched in every direction. I stood there in the cold, the silence pressing in. My breath quickened, panic clawing at me. How does a trail just end? I turned back toward the cabin, suddenly aware of how far I'd come, how small and vulnerable it looked against the white wilderness. The rest of the day, I tried to convince myself it was over. Maybe whoever it was had been delirious, injured, and somehow managed to limp out another way. Maybe scavengers carried them off, though I saw no sign of struggle. But that night, as I lay in bed with the rifle across my lap, I couldn't shake the thought. What if they weren't trying to leave? What if they had only been waiting? Around. 2 a.m. A noise jolted me awake. A faint, deliberate creak from the floorboards in the main room. My blood turned to ice. I knew the sound of my cabin, knew how it groaned in the cold, how it cracked as the wood shifted. This wasn't that. This was a step. Slow. Heavy. I sat up, barely daring to breathe, every muscle locked in place. Another creak. Closer this time. I raised the rifle, sighting down the hall. The shadows seemed to ripple, the dim glow of the dying fire barely illuminating. The doorway. "Who's there?" I called, my voice cracking in the stillness. Silence. For a long minute, I sat there, rifle trembling in my hands. Then, nothing. No more creaks. No more sounds. Just the hiss of wind through the cracks. When dawn finally broke, I searched every inch of the cabin again. No prints this time, no blood, nothing disturbed. But in the frost on the window by my cot, faint and smeared, were streaks. The marks of fingertips dragged slowly down the glass, like someone had been standing there, watching. The face smeared its breath on my kitchen window before the mug left my hand. I didn't just drop it, I flung it. Coffee splashed the counter and hissed on the hot stove. I stood there with my palms flat on the edge of the sink, every inch of me telling me to move, but my legs wouldn't listen. The window glass glowed with the reflection of my overhead light, and beyond it, pale skin flattened against the pane, nose squashed, eyes wide as if the person had been running a long, long time and finally reached my wall. The lodge sits 30 miles off the highway, past a logging spur that turns to rutted snow, then to the kind of packed white where even your breath sounds loud. I'd gone out to winterize for the season, drain the pipes, lock the pantry, top off the generator, 2 days, maybe 3, then back to Anchorage. No guests this time of year. No neighbors within 5 miles. I keep a radio for weather, and a satellite phone that takes 40 seconds to find a bird on a good day. It was one of those nights where the sky is a low ceiling, heavy with snow, no moon, no stars, and sound feels like it has nowhere to go. I swallowed and reached for the shotgun above the back door without taking my eyes off the glass. "You, okay?" I called, voice scraping out of me. "You hurt?" The face didn't blink, just breathed, slow, even. A fog oval grew, slid, grew again. I popped the deadbolt, hesitated, then cracked the door 2 inches. The cold knifed my cheeks. "Listen," I said, louder now. "If you need help—" The face disappeared. I should have flung the door wide and stepped out onto the porch. That's the hospitable version of the story, the one where I play the good Alaskan. But something about the way that breath had marked the glass made my scalp pull tight. I shut the door, set the bar, and backed away to where my boots were, half on the mat, toes pointing toward the door like they'd been waiting to go back out. I pulled them on without unlacing, grabbed my coat, and killed the overhead light. The room fell into dim. The only glow came from the stove glass and the green dot on the generator panel in the hallway. I slid to the side of the window, pressed my cheek against the frame, and leaned so I could see the porch, nothing but wind pushing powder across the boards. "Okay," I told myself. "Okay." I clicked the safety off the shotgun. My mouth tasted like copper. 3 taps came from the living room window behind me. Not frantic. Not weak. Knuckles. Deliberate. I pivoted too fast and banged my hip on the table. The tap came again, 3 quick beats. I moved to the doorway of the living room and stopped. Another face. Different, older, or maybe just thinner cheeks. Not a hat. No hood up despite the cold. Lips were parted just enough to show the line of teeth. "Do you need help?" I asked, and my voice sounded like it belonged to someone trying to keep a horse from bolting. No answer. Breath fog. The slow, steady kind. I've seen men injured bad. I've seen people delirious with frost and pain. They don't stand still. They don't press their faces to glass like children at an aquarium. They don't knock in neat little sets of 3 and wait. The wind pushed around the corners of the building. A round, low sound like someone talking through a door. From the hall came another tap, then one in the bedroom, then one in the mudroom window beside the boot rack. My head spun to keep up. The lodge isn't huge, but it's a long rectangle with more glass than it needs because summer views sell. Fall bookings. I moved through the rooms, lifting curtains with the muzzle, setting them down again with my free hand until the fabric trembled. A face at the mudroom glass, a face at the hall, one at the den. All different. Pale in the low light, skin slick with melt, eyes forward. No waving, no speaking, just watching. My mouth went dry enough that my tongue hurt when it moved. I kept telling myself this was a prank, a group from town. Hunters messing with the guy up at the lodge, except there aren't groups out here at midnight in a storm. And if it were a prank, it would have come with laughter, with running, feet, with a truck someone forgot to muffle. I needed the radio. I backed into the hall where the little office is, thumbed the switch on the Noe set, and waited for the red LED to blink to life. It warmed to a glow. I switched to the local channel. We used to check in with a ranger out of the valley, thumbed the mic. "Base, this is Black Spruce Lodge. I've got people on the property. Multiple—" I glanced at the nearest window. The face there had moved closer, cheek almost squeaking the glass. "Unknown persons at my windows. Do you copy?" Static. Then the weather lady voice rolled its loop about gale warnings, drifts, limited visibility. The ranger channel was a low hiss. The satellite phone lives in the kitchen drawer with the big aluminum flashlight and the spare fuses. I dug it out, pressed power, and made for the back door. The phone always does better by the porch. I stopped at the kitchen window without meaning to. A third face was there now, not the first one I'd seen. Wider mouth, something dark on the chin that might have been a beard or frozen dirt. He breathed a circle, then placed his palm flat on the glass and dragged it slowly down. My own hand lifted without being asked and mirrored that motion on my side for 2 inches before I realized what I was doing. I cursed and jerked back. The phone chirped its little searching tone, a sound too cheerful for nights like this. I cracked the door and leaned into the cold. The searching icon spun. Then an X. No network. I shut the door, slid the bar, killed the kitchen light entirely, and stood in the dark with the shotgun pressed to my ribs. They didn't try to force the door. They didn't try the glass. They didn't speak. They only knocked 2, 3, 4 beats, and breathed and stared. It went on for 20 minutes, then maybe an hour. Time loses edges when all you have are windows and the width of your breath. At some point, I dragged the oak dresser from the den into the hallway and skidded it across the floor until it wedged in front of the front door. I did the same with the bench at the mudroom door and a chair at the back. I laid the shotgun on the table long enough to dig the flare pistol out of the gear bin. 2 flares left, expired, but I set it by the stove like a talisman. When I finally forced myself to look again, there were more faces than there had been. I counted without wanting to. 1 in the kitchen, 2 in the living room, 1 in the den, 1 at the hall, 1 by the mudroom, 2 at the bedroom side windows. 8, maybe more beyond my angle. Some in coats, some bareheaded. A few with those. Thin knit masks you can pick up at any feed store. A girl? No, a small woman with hair wet against the glass. I thought of all the ways this could be something ordinary. Snow machiners lost between cabins, a search party gone offline, folks from a fishing camp whose truck died and who didn't want to spook me by pounding on the door. But the longer I watched, the less ordinary fit. They looked at me like I was something in a tank, like they'd come to see whether I blinked to see if I'd try to leave. "You need to go," I said, calm as I could make it. "There's a ranger station 10 miles east. I'll call ahead and—" A tap on the glass 3 feet from my ear cut me off. I turned. A man stood at the little bathroom window I never think about. He had a scar that folded one eyebrow into 2. He didn't smile. but the corners of his mouth pressed until his skin creased. He looked down, slowly, theatrically, and then up again. Much later, in the quiet after, I would realize he'd been looking at the latch on that window. Seeing how it worked, making sure I saw him seeing it. I shut the bathroom door and shoved a laundry basket against it because I didn't have anything better to wedge. It made no difference and made me feel better, which is the worst kind of fix. At 1 a.m, the generator hiccuped once and smoothed out. My heart stopped, then started again like a hammer on a nail. I went to the panel and checked the fuel level, half a tank, maybe a little more, and the oil. Fine. I went to the back bedroom and pulled the rug aside to check the little hatch where the water shutoff is. The house creaked above me like a man changing his mind. I thought of the caretaker before me, a man named Kerr who liked to talk about ravens like they were people. He used to say, "Winter brings you the shape of your thoughts and makes you shake hands with it." I never liked that line, and I didn't like it at all with faces pressed against my glass. Somewhere around 2, the tapping changed. Not louder, not faster, different. Fingers now, drumming, and longer between sets. I stood in the living room and felt it in my feet. When I pulled the curtain just enough to look, they had backed away from the glass by a foot or two, still watching, as if they'd been given a note in a play to change blocking. "Why?" I asked the empty air. "What is this?" No answer. My voice sounded weak, and I hated it for that. I tried to outstare the nearest one. I lost. Eyes are animals that get tired sooner than we think. At 3, I made coffee I could barely swallow. At 3:30, I did a stupid thing. I opened the back door 2 inches to toss a flare onto the snow to buy myself a circle of light. The instant air moved between inside and out, the closest. Face lifted at the smell of warmth like a dog catching scent. I fired the flare high. It arced into the dark and bloomed white-green, painting the yard in a color that didn't belong to snow or wood or skin. In that washed-out light I saw 10, 12 figures, some near, some farther, all still. Others were shapes beyond the spruces, not moving, and I had the insane thought of a town pausing to watch a parade. When the flare hissed into darkness, the faces stepped closer again in unison, not touching the glass this time. The breath ovals returned. In the bathroom, in the kitchen, at the hall. I sat on the floor with my back to the heavy dresser and the shotgun across my knees and told myself to be a machine. Machines only do the one thing. Mine was to keep breathing, to keep the barrel. Between me and everything else, to keep the generator running, to keep the bar on the door. Dawn was a promise on the far side of a wall. If you don't look at it, you can still believe it's there. At 4:30, the radio crackled for half a second. I snatched it so fast I hit my thumb on the cabinet. "Base?" I said. "Base. Do you copy?" Static. Then a fraction of a human voice that could have been storm, or store, or nothing at all. I held the mic like a person's hand and whispered things no one could hear me say. A scraping came from the roof, not the blunt slide of a drift, the scratch of something moving with intent. A moment later, a soft thud hit the porch overhang, snow sliding off in a sheet. The faces didn't look up. They only stare forward, as if I were the only thing they had come to see. I couldn't keep track of time after that. The world narrowed to little tasks. Shove a chair here, recheck the window latch there, blow out and relight the stove. Every time I convinced myself they'd blinked away, I'd lift a corner of curtain and find eyes waiting. I would have sworn. I'd seen some of them change places, scar eyebrow moving from the den to the kitchen, the small woman with wet hair drifting from the living room to the bedroom window as if pulled by some slow tide. No running, no fogged-out stampede. They shifted as if a bell had rung where I couldn't hear it. Somewhere after 5, a sound came that took a second to name. My truck's door opening. I didn't remember locking it. I heard the glove compartment bang. I heard a laugh, short, not even amused, more like a test of what sound would do between the trees and the lodge walls. My keys weren't in the truck. They were in the brass bowl by the sink. I looked at them. I could see them. 4 steps from me to them, 6 to the back door, an arm and a decision to pull the bar. I stayed where I was. Snow brightened from black to charcoal to something that thought about being gray. That slow leakage is the most beautiful thing the North ever gives you, and I watched it start without the relief I usually feel. The faces grew clearer in that light. Older than I'd guessed. Younger. Beard frost that wasn't dirt. Eyes that watered in the cold and then stopped. Lines at the mouth of one that said he didn't laugh much. A ring on a finger pressed against glass, engraving frost with a perfect circle. The first birds didn't sing because there aren't many who do in February. Just after 6, the tapping stopped. Not faded, stopped. Like a conductor, cut the orchestra. Off. I waited a minute, then 3, then 10. I went window to window and lifted the curtain with 2 fingers and saw only snow and morning and tracks. Tracks everywhere. Not chaos. Lines. Roots. Places where feet had stood so long the snow beneath them had melted, refrozen, and gone white again. On the porch, under the kitchen window, fine scratches in the frost where a ring had traced little circles over and over. At the truck, the door stood open. My registration lay on the floor mat. The trunk was closed. I circled, shotgun low. The hood latch was popped, but the hood itself was down. Under the back bumper, the spare tire was loose in its cradle. Bolts run down to just before falling. It wouldn't have made it a mile before dropping. I was shaking and didn't feel cold. I wanted them gone. And they were gone. And the feeling didn't land like relief. It landed like the pause after a joke you haven't figured out yet. I closed the truck door, checked the locks anyway, and went back inside. The lodge felt lonelier in daylight, emptier in a way that wasn't quiet so much as hollow. I set the shotgun against the table, went to the sink to pour out the coffee I'd never drunk, and stopped because my own reflection in the kitchen window looked like a stranger. Something was wrong with the latch. I leaned closer. The little brass hook that keeps the window pinned from the inside was turned. Not open, not closed. Off vertical, just enough that if someone pressed hard from the outside and I wasn't looking, it would slip, and the window would move a 1/4 inch, and then the hook would catch where it had been moved to and hold again. It looked exactly like someone had practiced with it, carefully, until they figured out how far they could go without making it open outright. I stepped away from the glass so fast my heel slid on the wet I'd made when I dumped the coffee earlier. I didn't eat. I didn't sit down. I cleaned. I wiped every window with a rag to clear breath marks, even though it made me feel like I was erasing something a cop might want to see. I tightened latches, shoved furniture back, then forward again, then gave up on pretending the place could look normal. I got the satellite phone into the cold until it found enough of a sky to give me 3 bars, and I called the ranger number and told him everything except the part about my hand mirroring the stranger's hand. He said the storm kept him in, and he could head up toward me by midday if the wind sat down, and to keep the doors barred and not do anything dumb. "Anybody missing?" I asked. "Anybody you're looking for?" "Not that I know about," he said, and his voice made that distance noise phones make when they're too honest about how far they're talking. I sat in the chair with the shotgun again and watched. The trees pretend they hadn't seen anything. At 11, it tried to snow again and failed. The sky turned the bright white that makes you squint. The tracks started to soften at the edges. I told myself noon would fix something in me, as if time had duties. I went to the bedroom to grab the pack I'd left half-zipped. The curtains in there were still closed from the night. I parted them with 2 fingers and looked out. No one. Just the yard, the smear of tracks by the woodpile, the line of spruces. I let the curtain fall. Back in the kitchen, I looked at the clock, without reading it. I lifted the kettle. I set it down. I opened the cabinet to see what was left of the good coffee because I needed a task that wasn't watching, and I stared at the empty shelf for a long second before realizing I'd moved. The coffee yesterday. That was when I smelled wool. Wet wool, the old smell that comes off coats that have seen too many winters. I turned my head toward the mudroom. The door was shut. The laundry basket I'd jammed against the bathroom door was still where I'd left it, stupid against the painted wood. I moved 2 steps and felt, more than saw, a difference in light. You live alone and you know your house like you know your mouth. You can tell if something's in it that wasn't. I looked at the kitchen. Window. The glass was 2 shades darker than it had been a breath ago. I didn't think. My hands didn't ask me for permission. I snatched the shotgun off the table and spun, and I was in the middle of that turn when the thing my eyes had seen finally told my brain what it was. A face on the inside of the kitchen window, pressed, flat, a ringed hand leaving 4 clear streaks as it slid down the pane. I don't know if I shouted. I don't know if the gun hit the table or my knee. I don't know if the window latch moved of its own accord an hour earlier or if the ringed hand had found the exact angle it had practiced during the night. I know the glass fogged in a way I'd already come to recognize. Slow, even, patient. I know the lips were parted just enough to show a line of teeth. I know I could see the little white half-moons of frost stuck to the knit of the mask where breath had frozen and thawed and frozen again. I backed to the far wall without feeling the floor. The face didn't move. Breath. Fog. Drag. The ring scratched. The glass with a sound like a match. "Don't," I said, and my own voice sounded like a bad recording. The eyes didn't shift. The pupils didn't widen. The person, man, I think, exhaled, and the fog spread until the room behind him became a mirror that had only ever wanted to show me this. I eased the safety off, not daring to blink, and somewhere in the lodge a board cracked like a step. It might have been the roof settling. It might have been a sound from the hall. It might have been the front door or the mudroom or the bathroom, where a laundry basket meant nothing if someone had all night to study a latch. I kept the barrel steady and counted without numbers until counting became its own kind of prayer. Outside, wind lifted snow in small ghosts. Inside, the face pressed gently, as if reminding me of the depth of the glass and the shallowness of everything else. The ring made its small circles. The breath. Fogged and cleared and fogged again. Somewhere far away, the radio crackled and went still. And then, as if the same conductor who had stopped the tapping in the dark had moved his hand again, the ringed finger lifted from the glass. It left a clean crescent where it had been. That was all. He held my eyes for one long, ordinary breath, the kind you take when you're about to do a doable thing, and my hands shook so hard the barrel trembled, and the generator hummed the same pitch it had all night, and the day outside brightened a step. He smiled, barely, not with his mouth so much as with the corners of his eyes, like a man who's learned what he came to learn. The face drifted sideways and vanished into the room behind the pane, which used to be my kitchen. The fog on the glass thinned and faded until I could see my own reflection again, wide-eyed and small in a place that had looked big when I arrived. I listened hard for footsteps. I heard them, or I imagined I did. I waited for a door to open, for another face to appear where a face shouldn't. By the time the ranger reached the end of the spur road and snowshoed the last mile in, the only marks were on the windows. The tracks had blurred under fresh powder. The spare tire bolts were retightened to snug. My registration was back in the glove box and the door locked like a tongue held between teeth. He wrote in a little green notebook while I talked and didn't write when I stopped. He said he'd stay an hour and then another, and then he had to get back before dark because you don't toy with storms. We walked the lodge together. He ran his finger over the faint scratches under the kitchen latch and said nothing. He looked at the beam I'd dragged in front of the door and said, "That'll stop a person who wants stopping." When he left, he told me he'd check in by radio at dusk. I watched him go until the trees unspooled him. Then I stood in the kitchen where the ring had made its circles and held my breath until I couldn't, and then let it out in a fog that looked like anyone else's. I don't know if they'll come back tonight or next winter or never. I'll tighten the latches again, then tighten them more. I'll run the generator and pretend it drowns out the other hum I hear under everything now. I don't plan to sleep, but I know I will, because bodies are treacherous and do what they're built to do. When I wake, if I wake, the first thing I'll see is the window, and I won't know whether the face is on the outside or the inside, until I feel the draft on my skin, and I'm not sure which would be worse anymore. The bell above the glass door jingled before I touched it, like the diner already knew I was coming. I froze with my hand hovering in midair, my breath fogging in the sub-zero Alaskan wind. The road behind me was nothing but black ice and snowdrifts, 50 miles of emptiness. Every building along the way had been dark, motels with their signs turned off, gas stations with pumps bagged and chained, bait shops buried under frozen snowbanks. This place was the only light I'd seen in hours, glowing like a beacon in the whiteout. The neon sign flickered, buzzing in the cold. It said open, though half the letters were dim. The glow spilled across the parking lot where my car idled, engine struggling against the freeze. I should have been relieved to find it. Instead, I felt dread. That bell had rung before I even pushed the door. I pulled it open, and the bell rang again, sharper this time. Warm air rushed over me, thick with the smell of burnt coffee, grease, and something faintly chemical, cleaning solution that didn't quite cover old smoke. The lights were too bright, buzzing fluorescent tubes that made everything look pale and sick. The booths lining the walls sagged, their red vinyl cracked and peeling. The counter stretched long and chrome-trimmed, stools squeaking when the heater cycled on. A pie case sat empty, glass streaked with fingerprints. Plates of half-eaten food littered the tables, fries cold, eggs congealed, pie slices with forks left in them, jackets draped across booths, a knit cap tossed on a bench. But no customers. At the far end of the counter stood a waitress. Her uniform was faded, apron stained at the edges, notepad already in hand. She didn't smile. She didn't even greet me. She just said, flat and certain, "Coffee, black, burger, no onion, fries extra crispy." My chest tightened. That was exactly what I'd been craving for the past 50 miles. Not just close, exact. I tried to laugh. "Lucky guess." She scribbled it down without responding, slid the ticket through the pass window. A shadow loomed in the kitchen, a man in a stained apron, hat pulled low. He snatched the slip and disappeared, without a sound. The waitress turned back, poured coffee, and set it steaming in front of me before I'd even picked a stool. I lowered myself onto the one closest to the door. The vinyl groaned. My hands trembled against the warmth of the mug. "How did you know?" I asked. Her eyes were flat, gray like dishwater. "We always know," she said. The words settled heavy in my chest. I sipped. The coffee was bitter, burnt, but hot enough to sting my tongue. The clock above the register read 2:07 a.m. The second hand ticked, loud in the silence. I glanced again at the booths. The food was still steaming. Not long abandoned, fresh, but the seats were empty. "Where is everyone?" I asked. She poured a second cup and set it at the stool beside me. I frowned. I didn't order another. The bell above the door jingled. The stool scraped back an inch. My blood went cold. "Cream and sugar," the waitress said softly, pouring. The stool was empty, but the cup steamed, full. I gripped my mug tighter, heart pounding. "What the hell is this?" The waitress leaned closer. "Eat fast. They don't like to wait." "Who doesn't?" She didn't answer. The kitchen clanged. The smell of beef hit the air, onions sizzling, but I hadn't asked for onions. The neon sign flickered in the window, humming, then went dark. The glass turned black, a mirror. In that reflection, every booth was full. Pale faces stared back at me. blank expressions, dozens of them sitting, where empty seats had been, all watching in silence. My breath hitched. I turned. The booths were empty. But in the glass, they were there. The waitress slid the plate in front of me. Burger, no onion. Fries extra crispy. Exactly right. I didn't touch it. The receipt printer whirred. She tore it free and slid it to me. The timestamp read 02:02 a.m., 5 minutes earlier, and beneath it, initials, R, M, my initials, but I hadn't given them. I looked at her sharply. "What is this?" She met my eyes. "Keep eating. Don't look at the door when the bell rings again." The bell jingled. The stool on my other side scraped back. Another cup appeared, steaming, invisible weight pressed against me from both sides. The booths reflected more faces, leaning closer. I forced a bite of the burger. Grease and char filled, my mouth heavy and sour. The fries crackled with salt. I chewed slowly, too aware of the silence, too aware of the unseen presence at my sides. The CB radio crackled behind the counter. A voice hissed through static. "North Fork, this is mile 46. 2 trucks parked across from you. Engines off. You got eyes?" The waitress didn't move, didn't touch the mic. But the radio answered anyway, her voice bleeding through. "We've got glass." My skin prickled. 2 trucks. I remembered the gray pickup that had tailed me for 10 miles earlier before vanishing into the dark. 3 in the Ford, the voice said. 2 in the Chevy. Lights off. The waitress finally looked at me. "You said you were alone." "I am." My throat was dry. Her expression didn't change. "Eat faster." I glanced at the windows. In the reflection, the faces pressed, closer, mouths opening soundlessly. My ears rang, though the diner was silent except for the hiss of the grill. The receipt machine whirred again. Another slip slid out, another timestamp from minutes earlier, another set of my initials. "What happens at 2:17? I whispered. The waitress pulled a napkin from her apron, scribbled something, and slid it across. My fingers shook as I unfolded it. "Wait until 2:17. Use back." My heart thudded. "Why?" She didn't answer. The bell jingled again, softer this time, like a polite knock. The stools shifted, wood creaking. The booths in the glass filled with more shapes, crowding, leaning, eyes unblinking. The cook banged a pan in the kitchen but never showed his face. I ate another bite, then another. My jaw ached from forcing myself to chew. The clock ticked slowly, every second stretching. The bell jingled again. A hand appeared in the window reflection, pressed flat, leaving frost trails as it slid down. Another hand joined. It. More and more. The waitress whispered, "Keep your back to the door. Don't look. If you do, they'll come in." The CB crackled. "They're checking tires now," the voice hissed. My chest seized. At 2:17, the neon sign outside went black. The reflections vanished. The booths were empty again. The waitress slid my keys across the counter. Her eyes were tired now, but sharp. "Go. Back door. Don't stop. Don't answer if they call your name. And don't check your tires until morning." I bolted. The employee's hallway was narrow, the floor sticky with grease. The cook's silhouette loomed, but he never turned. I shoved through the back door into a snow-choked alley. The cold hit like a knife. My car sat half-buried, headlights faint, in the storm. I didn't look at the front lot. I didn't want to see the trucks. I sprinted, slid behind the wheel, and jammed the key in. The engine coughed, then roared. I hit the side road the waitress had told me about. It cut through the trees and rejoined the highway a mile down. In my mirror, 2 sets of headlights pulled from the diner lot, but they didn't follow my turn. Miles later, I pulled into a turnout, shaking. I remembered her warning. Against my better judgment, I crouched by the tires. One valve cap was loose, barely hanging on. If I had left earlier, The tire would have gone flat in the storm. The napkin in my pocket still read, "Wait until 2:17. Use back." The next day, in daylight, I tried to find the diner again. The sign for North Fork stood, but the building was boarded. Windows dust-choked. Chairs stacked inside. It looked abandoned for years, but the napkin was still in my pocket. The receipt with my initials, too. The ink sharp, fresh. That night, at home, I woke at 2:17 without an alarm. My phone buzzed with no caller ID. The screen lit up with 2 words, "Your order." The first notification hit my phone just after midnight, when I should have been the only person awake on that stretch of road. Arrived, Tassaluk Village, Alaska. I nearly swerved into the ditch. The screen lit my face pale in the dark, the words glowing with a confidence that made my stomach twist. My phone believed I was somewhere I wasn't. Tassaluk Village. I'd never even heard of it. The problem was, I was miles from anything. The road behind me had been empty for an hour, nothing but plowed banks and moose tracks. Ahead of me, only more snow and black spruce trees. I hadn't passed a single sign with the word Tassaluk on it. I knew Alaska towns, remote fishing, settlements, old mining sites, roadside dots with populations of 20, but not this one. I pulled over, engine idling, heater humming. I zoomed the map. There it was, a pin dropped in the middle of white wilderness. Tassaluk Village. Population. Nothing, no data, just a dot where no road should have been. The screen pulsed again. "Welcome back, Ryan." I dropped the phone. My name glared up from the cracked glass. I told myself it was a glitch. GPS screws up in storms. Cell towers misfire. But there was no service out here. My phone should have been dead weight, not alive enough to call me by name. I shoved it in, the cup holder, and kept driving. The snow thickened, my headlights carving tunnels through it. The road narrowed, shoulders dissolving into darkness. My knuckles ached from gripping the wheel. Another vibration. Another alert. "Continue straight to home." The arrow pulsed forward. I nearly turned the phone off right there, but part of me, some stupid, masochistic part, wanted to know what. It thought my home was. I followed. The road wound down, trees pressing closer, branches scratching the roof. My stomach soured with the sense of descent, as if I was driving into something deeper than a valley. The phone's glow lit the cabin of the car. ETA, 2:44 a.m. Distance, 7 miles. My gas gauge hovered near empty. Even if I wanted to turn back, I wasn't sure I'd make it. The snow thinned after 10 minutes. The trees parted. My headlights spilled across shapes ahead. Buildings, not many. Maybe a dozen wooden cabins scattered along a frozen clearing. Their roofs slumped under heavy snow, windows rimmed in frost. Smoke rose from one chimney, faint against the black sky. The rest looked abandoned. No cars, no tracks, no footprints. My phone buzzed. Arrived, home. I parked in the middle of what passed for a street, tires crunching ice. My breath fogged the windshield as I leaned forward. I had never been here. I swear it. But the way the place sat, the way the cabins leaned against one another, the angle of the church spire tilting, over the square, something about it scratched at memory, déjà vu in my teeth. The phone vibrated again. Battery low, 5%. Perfect timing. I stepped out into the cold. It hit like knives. My boots crunched on snow hard enough to squeak. The village was silent except for the moan of wind between the cabins. A single lamp flickered in the church window. The rest, dark. I walked. The snow here was undisturbed, smooth as untouched flour. No prints but mine, no sled tracks, no signs of life. Yet, as I passed the first cabin, a curtain shifted. I stopped dead. My chest locked. Someone was inside. I stared, breath clouding the air, but the window was blank again. Frost coated it, thick and opaque. My phone buzzed. I pulled it out with numb fingers. The screen showed a list of recent locations. Work, Anchorage, correct. Gas station, Wasilla, correct. Home, Tassaluk Village. The icon pulsed red. I backed away, heart pounding. I didn't live here. I had never lived here. A crunch sounded behind me. I spun. A man stood at the edge of the clearing. Parka hood pulled tight, fur rime-crusted. His face was shadow. He didn't move, didn't wave, didn't speak. I raised a hand halfway. "Hey, you live here?" No answer. He stepped once, boots crunching, then stopped again. My phone buzzed. Contacts nearby. 1. The number shifted. Contacts nearby. 2. Another figure appeared between cabins. Then another. Within seconds, half a dozen stood watching me. Silent. All hoods, all parkas, shapes with no faces. My phone glowed. "Welcome." "Back, Ryan." I dropped it into the snow. My lungs strained to pull in frozen air. The figures didn't move closer. They just stood, like they'd been waiting for me. I forced myself back into the car, hands shaking so badly I fumbled the keys. The engine sputtered, caught, roared. Headlights blasted across the cabins. The figures were gone. I slammed the car, into reverse, fishtailed, spun back toward the road. My phone screen glared up from the snowbank as I sped away. The road twisted uphill, tires slipping on ice. My breath came ragged, vision tunneling. The dark pressed close again. After miles, the trees thinned. The highway appeared like a lifeline, wide and salted. Streetlights glowed faint on the horizon. I pulled over at the first gas station I found, heart still thrashing in my chest. I bought coffee with shaking hands. The clerk looked at me like I'd seen a ghost. "You all right?" he asked. I forced a nod. "Yeah, just long drive." "From where?" I opened my mouth to say Anchorage. Instead, my tongue betrayed me. "Tassaluk." The clerk's face went blank. He set the change on the counter without touching my hand. "That place doesn't exist," he said. I drove the rest of the way home with the radio blasting, needing any sound but my own breath. My phone was gone, still lying in that snow, but the ghost of its notifications burned in my mind. When I got home, my laptop chimed. A new location history had synced from the cloud. Timeline, midnight 3 a.m. Destination, Tassaluk Village. Status, home. The screen pulsed once, as if waiting. Then a final notification popped up. "Welcome back." And beneath it, a map. The pin wasn't in Alaska anymore. It was over my apartment. The first knock came when the snow had already buried half my truck, and I knew there was no one who should have been out there. The storm had rolled in fast, the kind of Alaskan blizzard that swallows entire highways like they never existed. One minute I could see the reflectors on the road's edge. The next I was driving blind, tires skidding under me as snow hammered the windshield so hard I could barely see the wipers moving. I told myself I'd push through until the next town. But after the back end of the truck fishtailed on black ice, I veered off onto a narrow service road that cut between the trees. That was supposed to be temporary. I figured I'd wait it out, maybe an hour at most. By midnight, the drifts had already reached my door. The truck rocked under the weight of the wind. Frost crept across the inside of the glass like veins. I killed the engine to save fuel, tucked myself inside my sleeping bag and tried to convince myself that I wasn't freezing as badly as it felt. Out there, in that kind of storm, there was no chance of help. Nobody was coming down this road until the plows ran in the morning, and that was if the highway was even still passable. That's why the knock didn't make sense. It came sharp, 3 precise raps against the driver's side window, the kind of knock you'd use on a front door. I bolted upright, breath catching in my throat. For a second, I convinced myself it was just a branch, or maybe ice sliding free. But the sound had been too clean, too deliberate. Snow was packed thick. Across the glass, so heavy it was like a wall of white. I couldn't see through it, not even a shadow. My fingers fumbled for the flashlight I kept between the seats. I clicked it on and swept the beam across the inside of the cab, then pressed it close to the frosted glass. All it showed me was the reflection of my own pale face, trembling with each breath. "Hello." My voice cracked in the roar of wind. Nothing answered. I strained to hear past the storm, but the howl swallowed everything. Then it came again, this time from the passenger side. My stomach dropped. I whipped the flashlight across just as the window thudded with another knock, snow shaking loose in powdery streaks. There was no way anyone had walked around the truck in that blizzard. I would have seen tracks, or at least movement through, the drifting snow, but all I saw was a wall of white and the shiver of my own reflection. "Who's there?" I shouted, louder this time, though my throat tightened around the words. The wind swallowed my voice. I grabbed my phone, praying for a signal, but the screen showed only a single dead bar. I held it high, waving it stupidly toward the windshield. But it didn't matter. Out here there was nothing. The flashlight trembled in my hand, the beam slipping across the frosted dashboard. My ears strained for sound, but all I heard was the hammer of wind and the faint creak of shifting snow against metal. Then came the third knock, this time from the back window. I spun, heart slamming so hard I thought I'd choke. The rear glass rattled as if someone had struck it with the side of a fist. The snow shifted and slid down in streaks, like fingers dragging through it from the outside. I froze in place, my chest heaving. Whoever it was, or whatever it was, had circled the entire truck. The thought lodged in my head like a shard of ice. Nobody should be out there. Nobody could be. I slid down in the seat until the flashlight beam angled toward the roof. Killed. The light, and pressed my hands over my mouth to muffle my breathing. The darkness inside the cab was suffocating, my own pulse hammering louder than the storm outside. For a moment, everything went quiet. No knocks, no rattling door handles. Just the groan of the truck under the weight of snow and the endless scream of wind. I started to think I'd imagined it, that the storm was messing with me. Sleep deprivation. Fear. But then I heard it, soft, deliberate, the creak of the driver's side handle. Someone was trying to open the door. The handle rattled once, then again, harder. I could hear the metal clink as if someone was impatient, testing whether I'd locked it. My whole body tensed, every nerve screaming at me not to move, not to breathe. I had locked it. I remembered pressing the button down when I first parked, but the sound of it being tested was worse than if I hadn't. Whoever was out there knew I was inside. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying the noise would stop, when my phone buzzed against the seat. The vibration startled me so bad I almost dropped. The flashlight. I snatched the phone up, thumb brushing the screen. No signal, no Wi-Fi, but across the middle of the display, a notification glowed. Step outside. I stared at it, frozen, my breath catching in my throat. The words didn't make sense. Nobody could message me out here. No apps should even load. But the letters glared in bold white. Another vibration. Now. My stomach dropped. My thumb trembled as I tried to swipe it away, but the screen wouldn't respond. And then the pounding began. It came from all sides at once. Fists hammering. The glass, doors, roof. Every panel of the truck shook like I was trapped inside a drum. Snow fell in sheets off the windows, rattling to the ground. I screamed before I could stop myself. "Leave me alone!" The pounding stopped instantly. The silence afterward was worse. The only sound was the ragged heave of my own breathing, fogging the inside of the cab. I wiped the glass with my sleeve, desperate to see something, anything, but outside was still nothing but white, the storm swirling so thick it was like being buried alive. The phone buzzed again. Almost out of time. I dropped it onto the seat like it had burned me. I reached over and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. Headlights cut into the blizzard in two faint cones, and that's when I saw it. A figure stood directly in front of the truck. Tall. Too tall, maybe. A heavy coat whipped in the wind, hood pulled up so tight I couldn't see a face. It didn't move, didn't flinch at the blast of headlights. Its hands hung limp and pale at its sides. For a second I thought it might be a stranded driver, someone who'd wandered off the highway. But then the snow plastered across where the face should have been slid in sheets, and there were no features beneath. No eyes, no mouth, just smooth skin stretched taut. A strangled sound tore out of my throat. I slammed my palm on the horn, the blare vibrating through my bones. The figure didn't move. I shoved the truck into drive, slammed my foot on the gas. The tires spun, skidded sideways, caught. The truck lurched forward, snow spraying in twin geysers. I braced for impact, for the thing to smash against the hood. But when the lights cut through the next curtain of snow, it was gone. I drove blind, fishtailing, engine howling, my whole body shaking. My eyes darted between the windshield and the mirrors, terrified I'd see it clinging to the back. The road wound down, trees looming on either side, branches snapping under the weight of snow. My chest heaved so hard it hurt. Then my phone buzzed again. I didn't want to look. But I had to. You forgot to lock the door. I glanced at the locks. Every one of them was pressed down. I reached out anyway, slamming them all again, hearing the mechanical click just to reassure myself. The phone buzzed once more. Too late. A scrape sounded across the roof. Slow, deliberate, metal on metal, like fingernails dragging. I screamed and floored the gas. The truck fishtailed hard, skidding. Into the center of the road, snow blasted across the hood. I clutched the wheel with both hands, praying the tires would hold. The scraping stopped. I risked a glance at the rearview mirror. For a split second, I thought I saw a pale hand press against the inside of the back window. But when I whipped around, there was nothing there. The storm began to thin after that, the trees parting, the world opening up. I spotted the faint orange glow of streetlights ahead, a stretch of highway that looked like salvation. Salted, plowed, wide. I pulled onto it, chest hammering, sweat freezing against my temples. My whole body trembled, every nerve screaming to keep driving, don't stop. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had gotten in before I locked the doors. The highway should have felt safe, but the longer I drove, the more wrong it felt. My eyes flicked between the mirrors and the windshield, convinced something was in the cab with me. I kept glancing at the locks, pressing them down again and again, even though they were already sealed. The storm thinned as I passed mile markers, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. My chest burned from shallow breathing, and every time the truck hit a bump I imagined someone shifting in the back seat. After 20 more miles, I spotted a faint glow ahead. A rest station. The fluorescent tubes buzzing through the snowy haze. Looked like heaven itself. I pulled in hard, tires skidding across the salted lot, and killed the engine. Inside, the air was stale and warm. Vending machines hummed. 2 truckers sat at a corner booth, their mugs steaming. They looked up the second I walked in, and their eyes told me what I already knew. I looked like hell. "You okay, man?" one asked, his voice cautious like he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. I opened my mouth, but all that came out was a rasp. There was someone out there. The other trucker tilted his head. "In that storm?" I nodded, still trembling. "They knocked on my truck. They tried the doors. I stopped myself, realizing how insane it sounded to say they had no face. The first trucker pushed a styrofoam cup coffee toward me. "Sit, warm up." I collapsed into the booth, wrapping my hands around the cup even though I didn't. Drink. The heat soaked into my frozen fingers. My body still shook. I forced myself to glance at my phone. The screen was dark, battery nearly dead. I hesitated, then pressed the button. The lock clicked open with a green light, and I froze because it wasn't my room. I had slid the plastic keycard into the slot the way I'd done a dozen times that week, but the door in front of me wasn't the one I'd checked into. My room was on the third floor, 317, with a broken ice machine humming outside the hall. This was 209, a completely different floor. I hadn't even realized I'd walked down the wrong hallway until the lock clicked. The door creaked as it pushed inward, stomach knotted. Every nerve told me to back away, to pretend I hadn't touched it, but I couldn't stop staring. A faint draft slipped out, smelling faintly of old carpet and something metallic, like rust. I whispered out loud, "Wrong room." My voice sounded too thin in the empty hallway. I glanced at the card. Room 317 was printed in faded black ink. Same card I'd been using for 4 nights. Same one the front desk clerk had handed me when I'd checked into this lonely hotel off the Alaskan highway. Nothing about it should have opened 209. I stepped back, ready to shut the door, when I heard movement inside. Not the shuffle of someone walking. Not the heavy thud of luggage, just a small, soft drag, like fabric against carpet. My breath caught. I should have left right there, but the sound pulled me closer. I leaned in, heart pounding in my throat, and peered inside. The room looked almost normal. Bed made, curtains drawn tight, TV remote on the nightstand. But something was off. The sheets were wrinkled like someone had been lying there minutes ago. A chair sat pulled out from the desk, angled toward the door as though someone had been waiting, and the closet door, ajar, just an inch, shadow leaking out. I whispered again, "Hello?" No answer. The hall behind me stayed empty. The elevator dinged faintly down the corridor, but nobody came out. I should have shut the door, marched to the front desk, and demanded to know why my card worked here. But instead, like an idiot, I stepped inside. The carpet crunched faintly under my boots, still wet from snow. The air was colder than it should have been, even with the heater unit humming. I kept glancing at the bed, the wrinkled sheets, waiting for someone to sit up. The sound came again, the faint drag, like fabric shifting. It came from the closet. My flashlight app stuttered to life in my shaking hand. I lifted the beam toward. The narrow crack. The sliver of dark inside didn't brighten. My chest ached with the weight of my heartbeat. I reached out with trembling fingers and pushed the door open. The closet was empty. No suitcase, no shoes, no clothes, just a long, vertical smear across the carpet where something heavy had been dragged out. I stumbled back, light shaking across the walls. That's when I noticed something on the desk. A folded piece of paper. I picked it up, the edges crisp, the ink pressed so hard it had bled into the cheap hotel stationery. 3 words, in block letters. "Why are you?" Not, "Why are you here?" Just, "Why are you?" I dropped it like it burned. My phone buzzed in my other hand, the screen flashing with a low battery warning, and when it dimmed, I saw my reflection faint in the black glass. Only, behind my reflection, in the room's mirror over the dresser, there was another shape. Tall, still, standing too close to where I was. I spun with a shout, flashlight beam swinging wild across the room. Nothing, just the chair, the bed, the half-open door still hanging ajar into the hall. I couldn't breathe. I bolted for the door, card still in my fist. I slammed it shut behind me and sprinted up the stairs, my chest burning like I'd run a mile. When I finally shoved open the door to 317, I collapsed against it, sliding down until I was on the carpet. My room looked the way I'd left it. Messy bed, TV humming softly, my suitcase slouched against the wall. Normal, safe. But the card still lay in my palm, glowing faint green at the edge. And when I turned it over, the printed number no longer. Read 317. I sat there on the floor of 317, staring at the plastic card in my hand like it might explain itself. My heart thudded so hard I felt it in my teeth. The numbers had definitely changed. I'd checked in days ago, I knew what room I was in, but the card was mocking me, showing me 209 in crisp black ink like it had always been that way. I told myself. I'd march to the front desk, slam it down, and demand answers. But my legs wouldn't move. It was past midnight. The snow outside battered the windows like a wall of static. This wasn't a chain hotel. It was a rundown roadside place hours. From Anchorage. The clerk at the desk was probably half asleep, and I wasn't sure I wanted to see his expression when I asked. Instead, I set the card on the nightstand, crawled into bed with my clothes still on, and pulled the blankets up to my chin. Sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that paper, the 3 words written in block letters, "Why are you?" Around 2 a.m., the sound started. At first, I thought it was the heater kicking on. A low hum, followed by a click. Then I realized it wasn't coming from the heater. It was coming from the hallway outside my door. A dragging sound. Fabric against. Carpet. Slow. Measured. I held my breath, ears straining. The sound slid past my door, dragging from one end of the hallway to the other. My hand inched toward the nightstand, toward the card. I don't know why I thought holding it would help, but I needed something in my hand. When I picked it up, the number had changed again. Not 209, not 317. Room. Just that, in block letters. I nearly threw it across the room. My phone buzzed. On the nightstand, lighting up the dark. I grabbed it, desperate for connection, for proof I wasn't losing it. Still no bars, but a notification stretched across the screen anyway. You left the door open. My stomach lurched. I whipped my head toward the entrance. The door was closed. I stared at the lock, willing it to stay shut, when the dragging sound stopped. Silence pressed against the walls. Then, 3 soft knocks against my door. I couldn't move. Couldn't. Breathe! The knocks came again, harder. I lurched up, backing away until my shoulders hit the window. My breath fogged the glass behind me. My eyes never left the door. The card in my hand glowed faintly green, like the strip was active. My phone buzzed again. "Room 209 is waiting," I screamed. The sound bounced back at me, small and useless. The knocks turned into pounding. The whole door rattled in its frame. I ran to the bathroom, slammed the door, and locked it. I sat on the tile, gasping, clutching the useless card. The pounding stopped. For 10 minutes, maybe 20, silence stretched. I thought maybe I'd dreamed it, maybe stress and fatigue were warping everything. Then I heard the drag again. Not in the hall this time. Inside the room, something heavy sliding across carpet, a chair moving, a suitcase being pulled. And then the faintest creak, my bathroom door handle twitching. I pressed myself back against the tub, holding the card up like a weapon. The handle twitched again, turned slowly, clicking against the lock. My phone buzzed one last time. My shaking hands brought it to my face. Quotonin is open. The bathroom light flickered, then went out. I sat in the dark, clutching plastic and glass, listening as the handle turned one final time. The lock clicked. The door began to open, and in the faint sliver of light from the window, I saw a tall shape standing there, perfectly still. I never saw a face, just a silhouette waiting, watching, filling the frame like it had been there all along. The card slipped from my fingers and hit the tile. It landed, face up. The numbers were gone. Only 2 words remained. You are. The first crunch of footsteps in the snow snapped me awake, and I knew instantly they weren't mine. The night outside was brutal, the kind of cold that seeps through even the best sleeping bag. My breath had fogged the inside of the nylon tent into a thin layer of frost, and I'd drifted in and out of shallow sleep. But that sound cut straight through the haze. A steady, deliberate step in the darkness just beyond the thin fabric walls. At first, I told myself it had to be an animal. Out here in the Alaskan wilderness, moose and caribou wandered near camps all the time. But the sound was too precise, too human. The slow crunch of boots pressing into crusted snow. My heart thudded so hard I thought it would shake the tent poles. I held my breath, straining my ears. Another crunch followed, closer this time, then another. They weren't random movements. Whoever it was, they were circling. The nylon rippled as wind whipped down the valley, but beneath it, the rhythm continued. Step, pause, step. I checked my watch in the dim glow of my headlamp. 2:17 a.m. Too late for a hiker. Too early for anyone to stumble on my campsite by chance. I'd chosen this spot deliberately, miles off the road, down a frozen trail most people ignored once the snow came. No other tents, no signs of campfires. Just me, alone, with nothing but trees and black sky overhead. So why the footsteps? I forced myself upright, careful not to make noise, and reached for the knife I kept near the sleeping bag. My fingers were stiff with cold, but I wrapped them around the hilt like it might keep me alive. The steps dragged around the tent's left side now. I could picture the shape moving through the snow, inches away from my head, hidden only by a millimeter of nylon. The urge to unzip the flap and shine my light was overwhelming, but the thought of seeing someone standing there, waiting, froze me in place. The sound stopped. I strained so hard to listen that my ears rang. Nothing, just the wind groaning in, the treetops. Then, directly behind me, on the far side of the tent, another crunch. Whoever it was had moved silently around the back. My chest seized. I clamped a hand over my mouth, desperate not to breathe too loud. The steps resumed, circling slowly, deliberately, around and around. My entire body tensed with every pass, every pause that lingered too long, every faint shift that made the fabric ripple. I whispered in my own head, "Animals don't do this. Animals don't circle." The worst part was knowing how vulnerable I was. A thin layer of nylon was all that separated me from whoever was out there. If they wanted in, it wouldn't take more than a flick of a blade or the pull of a zipper. I thought about calling for help, but my phone was buried in my pack, and even if I dug it out, I doubted I had service this far out. Another step. Closer now, so close I swore I heard the faint squeak of snow compressing under weight right outside the flap. I clenched the knife tighter. My lungs burned. Then the sound stopped again. Silence. I waited, frozen, seconds stretching like hours. And then a new sound whispered against the night. Breathing. Faint, shallow. Right outside. Not mine. Not the wind. Someone else's lungs dragging air in and out just beyond the tent wall. My skin crawled. The knife trembled in my hand. I leaned forward, inching toward the flap, heart hammering. I wanted to catch them, to prove I wasn't imagining it. I lifted the zipper slowly, teeth of the metal whispering apart. Cold air slithered inside, biting my face. I pushed the flap open just an inch. The beam of my headlamp swept out. Snow glittered across the clearing, trees bending under ice. My breath steamed in front of me. But no one stood there. No tracks, either. The snow lay smooth and untouched except for the shallow prints leading from my boots to the tent hours earlier. I swung the light left to right, desperate. Nothing. Slowly, I zipped the flap closed again, heart rattling in my ribs. But the second it sealed shut, I heard it again, footsteps crunching in the snow. This time, circling faster, around and around, like whoever was out there knew I couldn't see them, and liked it. The circling quickened, each crunch deliberate, like whoever it was had grown bolder after I checked. I sat rigid in my sleeping bag, knife clutched so tight my hand ached. My breath came in shallow gasps, fogging the air inside the tent. I couldn't stay silent any longer. "Who's out there?" I yelled, voice cracking in the darkness. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed pressed on me like a weight. I could hear my own pulse thundering in my ears, the faint creak of the tent poles shifting in the wind. Then, from directly in front of the flap came 3 slow crunches, like someone had taken 3 deliberate steps closer and now stood right there. I held the knife in front of me, blade shaking. "I'm armed," I shouted, though it didn't sound convincing even to me. The only reply was a faint exhale. Breathing again. Right outside. I snapped. I yanked the zipper down halfway and thrust my headlamp beam out into the night. Empty. The snow stretched smooth and glistening, not a mark anywhere around the tent, not a single footprint. My stomach twisted. I zipped it shut again, shaking so badly I thought I'd slice my hand on the knife. The circling started again instantly. Faster this time. Around and around like whoever it was mocking me. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe the wind carried sound strangely. Maybe I was hallucinating from exhaustion and cold. But then I felt it. A vibration through the frozen ground. Footfalls. Heavy. Real. I crawled to my pack, yanked out my phone. The screen lit up, and for a brief second I had hope. 1 bar. Enough for a call. I swiped to dial 911. The screen went black. Dead battery. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." Something brushed against the tent fabric. The nylon bowed inward like a hand pressing gently against it. Then it slid slowly down the wall, fingers tracing the outline. I scrambled back, my spine hitting the other side of the tent. I wanted to scream, but my throat locked. Then the hand pressed again, this time against the roof, dragging across the top, nails scratching faintly against the thin material. I lashed out, stabbing upward with the knife. The blade ripped through nylon. Snowflakes swirled in through the hole, but when I pulled it back, nothing bled. Nothing screamed. The footsteps stopped. For a long time, there was only the groan of wind and my ragged gasps. I thought maybe I'd scared it off, whatever it was. But then, behind me, on the other side of the tent, came a whisper. Not words I could understand. Just a low murmur, too close like someone kneeling inches away, speaking through the nylon. I snapped, ripping open the flap and stumbling into the night, knife and light trembling in my hands. The clearing stretched silent and untouched. No tracks, no shadows between the trees, just endless snow under a starless sky. But when I turned back, my blood ran cold. There were footprints, not leading to my tent, not circling it. They led away, a single line of prints stretched into the tree line, deep and fresh. My own weren't beside them. Just one set, like whoever had been out here had walked in circles around me all night and finally decided to leave. I stood shaking in the snow, staring at them. My light beam quivered as it followed the trail. It ended at the edge of the forest, swallowed in black. Behind me, the tent rustled. I spun, heart seizing. Through the rip I'd made in the nylon, a pale face pressed against the gap. Not inches from me. From inside. I stumbled back, falling hard into the snow. My headlamp beam flickered across the sagging fabric. The face was gone. The silence roared. My breaths came fast, frosting the air. I scrambled to my feet, knife useless, in my numb fingers. I wanted to run, to follow the prints, to flee into the trees, but my body wouldn't move. Then, faint and steady, the footsteps began again. Not around the tent. Behind me. Circling. I shut off the light, too terrified to see. I stood in the dark, clutching the knife, waiting for them to stop. But they never did. All night long they circled, and when the gray light of morning finally bled through the clouds, the clearing was smooth, untouched, no footprints, no trail, no sign anyone had ever been there. But the rip in my tent was still there, and pressed into the fabric from the inside, frozen solid, was the shape of a hand. The payphone started ringing the moment I stepped out of the grocery store, and I froze because no one ever called it. It was past midnight in a small Alaskan town where nothing stayed open late, except the gas pumps and this beat-up grocery that doubled as a general store. The parking lot was empty except for my truck and a single light buzzing overhead. Snow dusted down in faint flurries, the kind that whispered across the asphalt without sticking, and yet the payphone bolted to the side of the building shrieked, like it had been waiting for me. The sound was sharp, metallic, too loud in the stillness. Each ring stabbed through the night air. I stood there with my grocery bag digging into my arm, staring at the handset swinging slightly as if invisible. Fingers had nudged it. Nobody used that phone. I'd lived in Alaska long enough to know it was a dead fixture, a relic, but it kept ringing. I turned toward my truck, determined to ignore it, but the sound drilled into my skull. Ring, ring, ring. My boots crunched in the thin layer of snow, and the closer I got to the driver's door, the louder it seemed. Then it changed. The rings weren't spaced evenly anymore. They were frantic, almost desperate, like someone knew I was walking away. I froze, hand on the truck handle, my breath steaming in the cold. My heart thumped hard against my ribs. And then I heard it, a faint voice between the rings, muffled, calling my name. Not shouting, not distorted. Just calm, like someone standing inches away saying it through glass. I spun back. The phone still hung in its cradle, light from the buzzing lamp above spilling across its scratched metal face. No one else in the lot. No footprints. In the snow. My mouth went dry. The bag of groceries slipped from my hand, cans clattering against the asphalt, but I didn't care. My legs moved on their own, carrying me toward the phone. Each step felt like I was walking into a trap, but the voice, hearing my name whispered like that, it pulled me closer. The phone rang again, louder this time, echoing off the dark. Storefront windows. I reached out, hand shaking, and gripped the receiver. It was ice cold against my skin. The second I lifted it, the ringing stopped. Silence bled across the lot. The only sound was my own breathing, ragged and shallow. I pressed the phone to my ear, static crackled. Not dead air, something else. Breathing. Whispered, "Hello?" The line hissed. Then a voice, low and steady, said, "Why did you leave the door unlocked?" I pulled the phone away, staring at it like it had bitten me. My voice shook. "Who is this?" The line buzzed, and then the voice said my name again. Perfectly. The exact cadence my mother used when she was angry, the way no stranger could, imitate. My stomach turned to ice. I slammed the receiver back onto the cradle and staggered back, almost slipping on the thin snow. My heart raced so fast my chest hurt. I wanted to leave, to jump into my truck and peel out of the lot, but my body wouldn't move, because the phone started ringing again. Ring. Ring. I backed away, every instinct screaming to run, but my eyes stayed glued to it. The light above buzzed, flickering faintly, shadows twitching against the wall. The phone rang harder, sharper, until it felt like the sound was coming from inside my head. I shouted at the empty lot. "Who's there?" Silence. Then the phone stopped mid-ring. I stood frozen, clutching my arms tight until a new sound drifted across the lot. The receiver swinging on its cord, back and forth, slow at first, then harder, faster, slamming against the metal box with a clang. I couldn't take it anymore. I bolted to my truck, fumbling the keys with numb fingers, and yanked the door open. My groceries still lay scattered on the ground, but I didn't dare pick them up. I just wanted out. I slammed the door, jammed the key into the ignition and turned. The engine coughed, sputtered, refused to start. My breath fogged the cab as I tried again, twisting the key until my wrist ached. Then, from outside, the ringing resumed. Not frantic this time. Slow, patient. I dared to glance at the store's wall through the windshield. The payphone's red light flickered faintly, and for the first time I noticed the frost on the glass. There was a handprint, smeared across it from the inside. I gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles burned. The engine refused to turn over, coughing with each attempt like it was choking. My pulse roared in my ears. Outside, the payphone kept ringing. Slow, steady, like it knew I was trapped. I slammed the key again, muttering through my teeth. "Come on, come on!" The truck shuddered but didn't start. The ringing grew louder, sharp enough that it vibrated in my skull. I snapped my head up and realized the sound wasn't coming from the payphone anymore. It was coming from inside. The cab, the passenger seat. I jerked back, heart seizing. My eyes locked on the dark seat beside me, empty except for my crumpled coat. The ringing shrieked from nowhere, filling the space until I thought my eardrums would burst. I scrambled, fumbling, for my phone, dead, black screen. The ringing didn't stop. Then, silence. I sat trembling, barely able to breathe. My eyes flicked to the windshield. The payphone stood in the glow of the buzzing light, silent again. The receiver no longer swung. It just hung there, waiting. Whispered to myself, "Don't do it. Don't answer it." But the cab felt smaller by the second, like the air was being sucked out. My lungs couldn't keep up. Before I realized it, my door was open and my boots crunched against the snow. The cold knifed through my coat as I staggered toward the payphone. Each step felt like walking into quicksand. My breath fogged in the flickering light. The phone rang. Again when I was 3 feet away. I forced myself to lift the receiver. The line crackled, and for a moment there was nothing. Then I heard it again, breathing, slow, steady. I whispered, "What do you want from me?" The voice came clear. My own voice. "You shouldn't have answered." I dropped the phone like it was alive. It swung violently, clanging against the box. My legs carried me back toward the truck, but something made me glance at the store's glass doors. A figure stood just inside behind the reflection of the fluorescent light. Tall, still, watching. I stumbled, fumbling with the truck handle. My fingers slipped, numb with cold and panic. By the time I yanked the door open and climbed inside, the figure was gone. The engine coughed again, then roared to life as if it had been fine all along. I slammed it into gear and tore out of the lot, tires spitting slush behind me. The payphone's ring chased me down the road, faint but constant, echoing even after the store disappeared in the rearview mirror. I drove for miles, not daring to look back. My heart didn't slow until I hit the stretch of highway that wound between the trees. For the first time, the world seemed silent again. I told myself it was over, until my headlights washed over another payphone. This one stood alone, bolted to a post at the edge of the turnout, half buried in snow, and, as my lights hit it, the receiver lifted on its own, swinging into the air. I slammed the brakes, skidding sideways across the icy pavement. My truck stopped just yards away, engine idling hard. The payphone rang. I gripped the wheel, whispering, don't touch it." But then my phone, dead for hours, buzzed in the cup holder. The screen lit up with a single notification. "Answer. It's your name." I couldn't breathe. My hand shook as I picked it up. The display showed an incoming call from an unknown number. The ringtone matched the payphone. I sat frozen, staring at the glowing screen until my thumb moved on its own and pressed accept. The line hissed. Then my own voice whispered through the static, You left the door unlocked again. The call ended. The screen went black. The highway stretched silent ahead, trees leaning in as if listening. I sat in the cab, shivering, gripping the useless phone, waiting for the ringing to start again. And it did. Not from the highway, not from the payphone, from the back seat.